Hey everyone, glad to have you here. If this is your first time, don't forget to subscribe. It helps me bring you more stories like this. Now, get comfortable. It's time to dive into the story inside the lab. Houston's first zombie outbreak. Now, let's get started. The guard didn't ask for my name, just handed over a clipboard and pointed to where I needed to sign. The badge printer was already down, he said, and the system was acting up again. Like that explained the refrigerated trailer humming in the corner of the lot, or the row of empty cars still running with no drivers in sight. I clipped the temporary badge to my jacket, kept my questions to myself, and stepped through the chain-link gate under a floodlight that made the whole place feel staged. The company name had been slapped over with a printed sticker, but the Pfizer logo was still visible underneath, faded but not gone. Inside, the air changed, colder, quieter. Pallets of trial kits stood shrink-wrapped along the cage wall, lined up like they were waiting for someone to admit what had already gone wrong. The intake corridor had been converted badly. Vinyl pop-up rooms stretched along the warehouse floor, each lit from within, numbered, taped, labelled. At Station 7, yellow tape cut diagonally across the door. A clipboard hung beside it with a red clip that didn't match anything else. I checked in at the tablet like I was supposed to, but nobody looked up when I keyed my name. The knightly waved from the dock as if that wave settled things. His vest caught the light, but the eyes above it didn't. Name was Kerr. Said it twice like maybe I hadn't heard him the first time. Told me I was on fridge logs, tablet syncs, and data pools for the overnight. Nothing I hadn't done before. Just not here. Not at this site. His voice was stretched tight like it had been used too often in a room full of people who stopped answering back. Security made slow laps inside the perimeter. The guard didn't speak, just watched. A white box camera scanned the tents and the hallway beyond. The lights overhead flickered like bad nerves. Floor tape tried to keep people moving the right way, but it wasn't made for real chaos. I started with the refrigerators. Each had a sensor puck and a paper log for redundancy because the only thing worse than warm product is arguing about whether it had gone warm. The pucks reported fine. The paper logs were signed by initials I had not learned yet. The freezer room had a metal door with a push handle that stuck halfway through its swing. I opened it, and a dry cloud floated out with the kind of cold that makes rubber hard. Shelves held coolant packs and labelled boxes. Someone had written a smiley face on a box and then crossed it out. At Station 3, a nurse practitioner in a disposable gown adjusted a sleeve on a woman who rested with eyes closed. A drip bag hung idle. The nurse's mask had a break in the elastic that she had fixed with a blue staple. She raised a hand without looking up, a hello that asked for distance. I moved on and kept to my list. The tablets for data pools sat in a rolling rack pointing inward like birds on a wire. Each showed a dashboard with green and grey blocks, timestamps rolling forward. I connected the cable to the first one and watched the progress bar inch in the polite way progress bars inch. The room beyond the row of pop-up doors glowed with different light, more clinical. A biologist in a lab coat stood with his back to me, shoulders drawn, gloved hands resting on the lip of a stainless cart. He did not move for a long time. Kerr leaned near my shoulder without warning. He smelled like coffee gone old. He asked if I had done trial sites in spring. I shook my head. He nodded like that was data too. He told me the drug name again, and the talking points we were supposed to remember, in case anyone from outside asked questions. Symptom mitigation, aggressive antiviral profile, monitor for rebound. It sounded like someone had written lines for a person far above this floor. The security feed ran on a monitor mounted to a column. 4 squares, 4 angles on the same problem. Square 1 watched the intake corridor. Square 2 watched the pop-up rooms. Square 3 watched the cage and the pallet doors. Square 4 watched the double doors at the back, the ones with the red exit sign above them like a promise. I checked the time stamp on each and matched it to the tablet clock out of habit. A minute drift on one. I tapped the screen and brought it back in line. The nurse at Station 7 was not a nurse. He wore a gown and a mask and the kind of stare that suggests a person has been told to do more than he has been trained to do. The clipboard said, "Trial patient 004. The red clip tried to make that number into a warning. The person inside the tent lay flat. The monitor on the cart read a line that did not waver. In school, they tell you what a flat line means. In life, you learn that not everything listens to school. I moved my eyes away, and I still saw the line. At 9:20 p.m., the radios began to fail in a polite way. Long delays in replies, then clipped answers, then static with words inside it that did not belong to us. Security asked for a reset of the repeater, and Kerr said he would get to it after intake. I checked the fridge log as if that would hold the roof on. A forklift beeped and then stopped where no one could see it. The white box camera watched the doors without blinking. I did the next thing on the list. Data pull, cross-check, note the time. Tick the box. Busy hands have a power. The power lasts until it does not. The woman at Station 3 opened her eyes and closed them again, like a person waking on a bus at the wrong stop. The nurse whispered to her in a voice meant for calming. Shh. He did not answer. I moved across the line of tents, cables underfoot, the sound of rubber soles on concrete like paper tearing far away. The biologist left the lab space and came into the warehouse light. He was in his 50s, hair grey where it showed behind the cap, eyes red in the way that comes from ours and from screens. He introduced himself as Dr. Roth and then asked for my first name as if collecting one more data point. When I said Miguel, he repeated it softly, as if checking the feel of it. He asked when I had last worked a trial where the drug outpaced the symptoms. I told him the truth. I had never seen that happen. He did not smile. Kerr got a call from someone whose name he did not put on speaker. He walked toward the cage, talking in that taut voice people use when the person on the other end outranks them. The guard at the cage slowed near him, then kept moving, eyes on the loop like rails hold a train. I stood near the monitor and watched the 4 squares. In Square 2, Station 7's tent flapped slightly. No one had touched it. Dr. Roth stepped to the monitor and frowned at the time drift I had already fixed, which made him look at me and then at the tablet rack. He asked if I could show him the overnight logs for 004 without taking the station offline. I said yes, because I believed it. I slotted the tablet for Station 7 into the pool and tapped through the consent flags. The screen fought me with a prompt about connectivity. Then it gave me the graph. Fever spike at intake, sudden drop after first dose, a long flat band of very low activity, a line that might be sleep, a line that might be something else under a blanket. The radio on Kerr's shoulder chirped and spoke without waiting for him to answer. A voice not quite steady said that the ambulance at the south gate had turned around. A second voice under the first said something about the main hospice. It told diverting everything. The word divert had a thick sound that stuck in the air. Kerr told the person to repeat the message, then walked toward the double doors with long strides, like the distance itself was a problem he could solve by length. I did not want to look at Station 7 again. I looked anyway. The tent flap moved again, a slow draw inward, then a release. Like breath if breath were a hand, the monitor for 004 kept the flat line that people draw when they are being dramatic about endings. The nurse in the borrowed gown shifted a step closer and then stopped with his toes on the tape. He looked around for someone to call his name. No one did. The double doors at the back opened and closed, and the sound was small for such a heavy swing. Kerr came back with a woman I had not seen. She wore plain scrubs and a face shield, with a glare that hid her eyes. She had the movement of a person who had been told to move through a place fast and without touching anything. She looked at Station 7 for a single second, then at Dr. Roth, then at me like I might be a missing piece. She told Kerr quietly that if any trial subject stopped responding, we were to seal the tent and call it no heroic measures. She said the word heroic like a thing out of a brochure. Security's loop carried the guard to the far end of the cage where the forklift was parked, like a large animal resting. The guard paused, ran a hand along the lift mast as if it might answer, then kept walking. The camera watched everything and said nothing. Outside, a horn honked 3 times from the highway, like someone laughing without humor. At 9:53, the lights buzzed. It was a small noise, but it made everyone in the visible world look up. I felt my jaw set, a thing my dentist had warned me about, a thing that gave me headaches I deserved. I took a slow swallow and tasted sanitizer I had not meant to taste. When I put the tablet down, my hand missed the rack by an inch and caught it the second time. Station 7's tent moved enough that the nurse finally stepped inside. He lifted the flap with 2 fingers and bent at the waist. Dr. Roth did not shout his name. He did not have to. The nurse dropped the flap and backed out. Hands up, palms out, a universal body sentence that said, "Stop." He said in a voice that sounded borrowed that the subject was responding. Kerr asked what kind of responding. The nurse said that a hand had reached for his sleeve. The nurse's sleeve had a brown mark I had not seen earlier. It looked like coffee. He rubbed at it without thinking and left it alone when it did not come off. Dr. Roth told everyone near Station 7 to step back and give space. He used a word from a training video for the way a person wakes wrong. He asked for the second dose protocol packet. Kerr told him the packet had been updated at 2000 and he had not had time to print it. Dr. Roth said he did not want the paper, he wanted the steps. The tent bulged outward, not much, enough to make the mask straps tug at the nurse's ears when he flinched. Kerr opened his mouth and closed it again. Dr. Roth lifted a hand as if to steady a shelf and kept it in the air, palm level, finger spread. He spoke out the steps he remembered. Monitor. Do not restrain unless safety demands it. Do not stimulate. Observe. Call for on-site physician. The on-site physician dropped a pen in the lab and did not pick it up. The monitor for Station 7 let out a little sound that was almost a tone. A hiccup in power, a test, a digital throat clear. The line on the screen stayed straight. I found my eyes flicking to the feed on the support column. Square 2 insisted on showing the tent as if the camera had decided that this square was its job now. In the upper corner of the square, the timestamp blinked once and returned. On the radio, someone out on the perimeter asked if we had the new pads for the crash. Bars. Kerr answered yes without looking. The person asked if we had applied the pads to the double doors. Kerr said no and then stopped himself from explaining why. The person on the perimeter said that the county alert system had sent a push about shelter in place for a 5-mile radius around one of the hospitals. No one asked which hospital. Everyone already knew it was one of the big ones. The woman in scrubs with the face shield made a small hand signal to Kerr. He nodded like he had just accepted the cost of something. He told security to lock the interior loop, which meant the guard would stay at the cage door and not make the walk. The guard did not protest. He posted at the door with the forklift to his left like a tall dog. At 10:06, Station 3's woman sat up in a single motion that did not match the last hour of her life. The nurse with her made a sound that fit inside a breath and reached for the cart without taking his eyes off her. She turned her head like a person smelling the first rain. Her eyes did not look at faces, they looked just to the side of faces. She opened her mouth and did not speak. The nurse set his hand flat on her shoulder and did not push. She turned her head like a person smelling the first rain. Her eyes did not look at faces. They looked just to the side of faces. She opened her mouth and did not speak. The nurse set his hand flat on her shoulder and did not push. Dr. Roth did a thing with his feet that moved him closer to Station 3 without appearing to move at all. He spoke the woman's name. She did not respond. He told the nurse to keep his hand where it was and to avoid close contact with the mouth and the hands. He spoke the cautions like he had said them before. The woman turned her head toward the sound of his voice and then pasted it, tilting to watch the ceiling light, as if the filament held a message. There is a special kind of quiet in a warehouse when people who know how to be loud choose not to be. The forklift did not beep. The dock door did not roll. The guard did not clear his throat. I could hear the air handler swish out and then in again, a long breath stolen from the world. Somewhere in a tent, a drip bag ticked. Station 7's tent did not bulge this time. It collapsed. The poles bowed inward and the flap fell open and a shape pushed under the edge with a steady slide, like a person crawling under a bed. The nurse jumped backward and crashed into the cart. The cart bounced, drawers rattling. A hand appeared, palm grey, nails white like chalk, knuckles nicked. The hand found the floor and bore weight. The rest followed. No one screamed. Everyone made small sounds that would be hard to repeat on purpose. Kerr took 2 steps forward and 1 step back. Dr. Roth said the word stop in an even tone and held his hand in the same flat shape. The thing on the floor looked like the subject. It wore the subject's hospital gown and the subject's wristband. It did not look at our faces. It looked at the edges of us, the outlines. It moved with a hesitation that was not weakness. It moved like a person watching a film of the room and trying to match it. The guard unholstered his sidearm like a man who had paid attention in training and had not expected to use it tonight. Kerr said, "Not inside, not inside." In a low rush, the guard lowered the barrel without lowering his arm. Dr. Roth stepped sideways, slow as if trying to block the thing's path with his attention. The thing's head tilted, its mouth opened a little. Nothing came out. The nurse, who had gone into the tent without permission, began to say the subject's number. He got to the first 0 and stopped. The thing on the floor placed a hand under its chest and pushed itself up. When it stood, it did not loom. It just rose like a person learning gravity for the first time. The red clip on the clipboard at Station 7 seemed bright in a way it had not before. Kerr spoke to the guard in a voice for simple machine, as he told him to bring the restraint pole. The guard took 1 step toward the cage and then corrected to the cart where the pole leaned. He lifted the pole and extended it until the loop at the end opened like a letter O. Someone was about to speak. He moved in a wide arc. The thing on the floor tracked the motion with its chin, not with its eyes. A radio crackled and bled another building's conversation into ours. In that noise, a person, far away, named a street we all knew and told someone to block an on-ramp. Dr. Roth raised his hand higher, palm forward, and said the subject's number like a person coaxing a child away from a wire fence. The thing's mouth opened further. A brown string hung on its lip, and it did not feel it. The first lunge in real life is always smaller than in movies. The thing moved enough to break the range that felt safe, and not enough to warn anyone who had not been watching closely. The guard's loop found a shoulder and tightened. The thing's arm twisted in the loop, bones moving under skin like knuckles in a pocket. The guard set his feet. The pole bowed. The woman at Station 3 began to stand up and did not stop at standing. She kept rising until she reached the edge of the bed and then did not see the edge. She stepped with an ankle that should not have held and made the little sound of a sock sliding on plastic. The nurse spoke her name with a question mark that had a lifetime behind it. She took another step. Kerr yelled for the tent zips to be sealed. He yelled the words in the wrong order, and then again in the right order. People moved because motion does not need instructions. Plastic screamed as hands pulled. Dr. The Roth pointed at the corridor door and told someone to alert the outside team that this building was going to lock down. He did not ask permission. The thing in the loop leaned into the pressure like a person leaning into a familiar wind, and the guard's heels slid an inch on the concrete. The forklift suddenly became important. I stepped toward it without thinking, because distance is a tool and mass is a tool, and I needed both. The keys hung from a little chain with a tag that had once said property of and then nothing. I turned the key and the machine woke. The orange light on top spun. A small carnival in a bad room. I drove the forks low and moved between the thing and the open space, making a fence out of metal no one could ignore. The guard used the shift to ease the loop toward a column where he could brace. The thing's lips moved. The sound that came out was not a word. It was the scrape of a throat that had been asleep too long. The movement of the mouth had purpose, but no language. The woman from Station 3 reached the end of her tent and pressed her face against the mesh like a child at a window. The nurse backed away without turning. His hands opened and closed without grabbing. He said, "Stay back," in a voice that trembled only once. She watched his lips and stepped toward the zipper. Dr. Roth told me to hold the forklift where it was and not to edge forward, as if he had seen me thinking about moving that extra inch. He spoke with the certainty of someone who had practiced the picture in his mind. The guard tightened the loop another notch. The thing's skin pinched under the band and did not blush or blanch. It stayed the same grey that made the blue wristband look vivid. Kerr got the interior doors sealed. The crash bars took the pads like a belt cinches after a big meal. The woman in scrubs with the face shield signaled to someone behind her and then handed me a pair of nitro gloves she had not put on. My fingers stuck a little as they went in. I blinked hard and brought the forklift to a full stop so the light would stop spinning. The radio finally delivered what everyone feared, a shelter in place, order full. For the entire block, strict limits on movement and a blunt warning that emergency crews would not enter without clearance. Nobody quibbled over grammar. The message carved silence out of the room. Dr. Roth fixed on the column monitor, square 2, just as every tent quivered, though no vent had cycled. At Station 3, the nurse pinched the zipper, unsure whether to seal it or flee. The woman inside cocked her head, copying some half-remembered gesture from a life she no longer owned. Kerr muttered that the sleepers had to be relocated, but Roth overruled him. Any stampede would teach the virus more than it taught us. A low groan rolled through the ceiling as mains power failed. The building folding onto generator without missing a beat. Lights dimmed, tablets lost signal, and the forklift's beacons slowed to a tired spin. Loop-bound subject 004 pivoted toward that orange glow, drawn to the space it protected rather than the machine itself. And Roth nodded, seeing pattern in the drift. Suddenly the dock intercom crackled, someone outside banging and begging to be let in, flashing a badge that might have been real. Kerr ordered every door to stay shut. Roth, thinking ahead, asked whether the refrigerated trailer was live and lockable from the inside. I said it was and sprinted to double-check. Night air rire of wet asphalt and coolant as I slipped into the trailer. Frost clung to the seams. The emergency release cord hung free and the latch clicked true. Enough cold space for 20 uneasy souls. Back on the floor, the banging had ceased, but tension spiked. The guard holding 004 trembled from fatigue. The woman in Station 3 inched the zipper up and down like a child testing a forbidden drawer, while her nurse looked to me for help only I couldn't give. Roth tried coaxing her with familiar names. She was already standing before he finished the list. Metal shrieked at Station 7 as a frame collapsed. 004 wrenched free loop, slipping to his forearm. He veered for the corridor until I eased the forklift forks down, blocking the G key. Apal Roth murmured that this strain respected edges. So Kerr and the guard steered 004 along the wall, coring him with lines instead of force. Then a lab tech in a white coat bolted from the hallway, rattling every crash bar he could reach until Roth calmed him by name. Seconds later, the radio gifted a single clear directive. Hospitals swarmed by waking coma patients. All sites must secure subjects and hold position. With straps and zip ties, we anchored beds to floors, while the on-site clinician pressed pallets strapping into my hands. Her quiet competence steadied everyone more than any speech. The doc reported fresh pounding at the sideman door. Someone insisting his wife had taken the shot and now wasn't right. Kerr refused entry. Roth proposed a compromise: open the outer gate, screen the man in the yard and stash him in the trailer if he passed a quick visual check. I watched from the inner door as the gate motor groaned open. A lone figure shuffled under the floodlight, clutching his chest. He pressed a steady hand against the glass. No bracelet, no lesions, just desperation. We slid a mask and water through a narrow gap, directing him to wait in the softly humming trailer. As the latch sealed behind him, nobody said the word hope aloud. Yet the shape of it hovered over the corridor, fragile as frost. Kerr opened the door as if it had teeth. He handed the mask and the bottle through with his arm extended to full length, and he closed the door with a click that satisfied him. The man put the mask on and walked to the trailer without being told twice. He climbed inside and sat on a crate near the entrance like a passenger, waiting for a ride he had not paid for. He kept his hands where we could see them. He kept the bottle in his lap, unopened. Dr. Roth nodded once, like the picture had improved by a single pixel. He turned back to the floor and to 004, who was now against the column with the loop tight and the guard breathing through his nose like an athlete. He told the guard to hold. He told the nurse at Station 3 to keep speaking and not to reach for the face. He told me to get the pallet straps we had left and to set up a barrier between the pop-up row in the open space, a low fence that would guide feet. We slung straps between pallet ends and column bases and the forklift mast. It looked ridiculous, and then it looked like design. The subjects, the ones who had begun to stand, drifted toward the lines as if drawn by etiquette. The woman at Station 3's mesh stood at the zipper and watched the strap like a road. She placed her palm against the mesh and tracked the length of the strap with her fingertips, moving in time with nothing but the thought of edges. At 10:41, the generator hiccuped under load and came back. The lights dipped like a person nodding off and snapping awake. In that half-second, square 2 on the monitor went to black and then returned. In that return, the image had a grain-like old film. The 10th row looked slightly wrong. I blinked and it corrected. The woman in scrubs saw it too and did not comment because commenting would make it real. A crash broke the quiet. The intake corridor door had swung open to the limit of its bar and slammed back. A man in an intake gown stepped through with the uncertain stride that had already become familiar tonight. He moved along the wall as if the cinder blocks had a map printed on them. He approached the first strap we had strung and stopped, examining the tension with his eyes and then with the back of his hand. Kerr cursed softly in a way that broke none of the rules and all of the calm. The new subject's wristband read, "Oh, oof." I saw the number as he brushed the strap. His face had a cut that had dried into a stiff line. He leaned into the strap and then backed away and tried the gap between the strap and the pallet. He did not look at any of us. He looked at the problem we had given him and interrogated it with the patience of a craftsman. Dr. Roth watched him as a teacher watches a student solve a problem in an unexpected order. We needed another fence, and we needed to clear a path to the trailer. The math of it looked simple and felt like juggling knives with oven mitts on. I ran to the cage and grabbed 2 more straps and a roll of shrink wrap. The shrink wrap had a cardboard core and spun out with a whine. I circled a column and a pallet until a plastic wall existed where there had been air. It looked fragile. It tested strong. Kerr asked the guard if he could hold 004 while Kerr relieved the dock. The guard did not answer. He nodded. His face had the flat look of a man inside a task that fills the whole day. He shifted his grip by a fraction and found a better angle. 04 pressed the back of his head against the column and closed and opened his mouth. The tongue flicked against his teeth with no memory of names. A streak of light moved across the far wall. I turned and saw headlights across the outer gate. A car rolled past slowly like someone looking for a number in the rain. It did not stop. It did not honk. It drifted out of sight. The yard returned to the steady white of the security floods. The man in the trailer looked at the passing light and then down at his hands again. He twisted the cap on the water and took a sip. He closed his eyes while he swallowed and then opened them quickly as if he had remembered something unpleasant about closing his eyes. The woman in scrubs approached Dr. Roth and spoke low. She said we had to consider that the antiviral was not suppressing the progression, but giving the progression a predictable path. She said her notes showed an onset rhythm after dosing that tracked with the reanimation we were now seeing. She said it without drama and without apology. Dr. Roth listened and then nodded. He did not agree out loud. He did not disagree. He adjusted the plan inside his head where plans live. Station 5's subject stood and took 2 steps and then stopped at the first strap like a person who had walked into a low fence at night. He traced the line with his toe, then changed direction and found the next strap. He walked the perimeter like security, not like prey. The nurse assigned to him called for help without raising his voice. He held his palms out and gave ground inch by inch. Dr. Roth told me to take the shrink wrap and the straps and to build a channel from the pop-up row to the inner yard door. He said if the worst came, we would move people through the channel into the trailer in small groups. He said the word people, not subjects. It mattered. I nodded and ran again, the roll of plastic squealing like a violin bow pulled the wrong way. I made a hallway. I set the forklift at one end as a gate and a pallet at the other as a backstop. I wrapped plastic from mast to column to pallet, layer over layer, until the sheet went opaque. I left a waist-high gap where we could look and speak and pass things through. It felt like setting a stage in a play written too fast. Kerr checked the tension with a practiced hand and gave me a short nod that warmed me more than the coffee in the break room ever had. The banging returned at the man door by the reclaimer tank. It had a wet thud this time, not knuckles, but shoulder. Kerr told the doc to hold. The doc said the person outside was making words, but the words did not sit in a sentence. The doc asked if he should talk back. Kerr said, "Yes, talk. Keep talking. Keep the person on the other side talking." He said it for the person outside and for the person inside who was hearing his own orders and finding them good. The man in the trailer shifted on the crate and stood and sat, again as if deciding which pose made him feel least like a problem. He lifted his bottle and then put it down. He looked through the open trailer door at us and then at the concrete under his shoes, like he might read the weather in it. He did not call out. He was giving us his patience because he wanted ours. A sound like wind in a flute came from Station 7. 004 had made it. A whistle between teeth. The guard flinched at the unexpected noise. The loop slipped a fraction. 004 turned at that exact moment toward the gap in the straps between the forklift mast and the column. I dropped into the forklift seat and inched forward to kiss the mast against the column base, removing the gap. The machine's fork made a dull note against concrete. 004 paused, head leaning to the side as if listening for the note again. Dr. Roth breathed out once in a way I could hear. He said, "Good." He said again that edges and rails mattered. He told the nurses to step away from the subjects and to speak from behind the straps. He told the guard to hold, and he told Kerr to gather everyone not assigned to direct restraint and to move them behind the channel. He told me to stand at the inner door again and watch the man in the trailer for changes. I did. The man in the trailer had taken off his cap and put it on his knee with the bill pointing at the door like a compass needle. He rubbed his thumb along the seam of the cap and watched the line where the yard light fell across the floor. He asked through the open door how much longer this would take, and I told him the truth. I did not know. He nodded like a person nods when choosing to trust a stranger instead of the night. At 10:58, the first scream came from inside the tents and turned into a cough before it could become a scream. The nurse at Station 9 shouted for help, and then swallowed the shout and spoke the name of the subject instead. The subject had bitten through the IV line and was chewing the rubber like a child chews on a toy at a store. While the parent says not to, Dr. Roth said, "Leave it," then changed his mind and said, "Restrain the hands, not the mouth." The nurse wrapped the wrists with soft restraints that tightened with a sound like snow under a boot. The world narrowed then. The line we had made with straps and plastic became the map. The subjects wandered toward it and along it, and the staff moved behind it in parallel, guiding with voices and with small movements, not touching except when touch was essential. The guard with the loop found a resting point and held like a statue of a man holding a rope in a storm. Kerr floated up and down the row like a man coaching a crew team, calling changes and watching for collapse. Dr. Roth stayed still. He stood where he could see the entire field and keep his words short. I realized he had stopped saying the drug's name. He talked about what we were seeing. He asked for note-takers. And the woman in scrubs lifted a tablet and began to speak into it softly, marking times and actions, not a report for a boss. A log, so the person after us would know what had worked. The man in the trailer called my name. It took me a second to understand that he had remembered it from the one moment at the door. He asked if he could tell me something he did not want to say to the others because it would sound like a confession. I stepped closer. He told me his wife had taken the antiviral at home, not at a clinic. He had gotten it from a friend of a friend who worked at a different facility, and he had not waited for instructions because he had been afraid of the line at the hospital. He said she slept and then she moved in her sleep like someone climbing a ladder in a dream. He said he had to tie her hands to keep her from scratching her face. He said he was not proud of that. I did not judge him. I told him to keep talking. He said she woke and did not know him and looked over his shoulder like something better was behind her neck. He said she had made a noise in her throat, like a bird lost in a warehouse. He said she had stood up and then forgotten how chairs worked. He said he had led her to the car, but she did not like doors that swung inward. He said he had put her back in the apartment and told the neighbor to listen, and he had driven here because the neighbor had said the word Pfizer, like a prayer, and like a curse too. I told him he had done what he thought was best at a time when best had changed meaning. He asked if the drug could make things worse. I said I was not qualified to say. He laughed once, a dry noise that did not linger, and said none of us were qualified anymore. He asked if he could wait. I told him yes. He said, "Thank you." That word hit a spot in me that had been sore for a long time and did not know it. Station 7 bucked, the loop held, the guard's arms did not. He lost a step and hit his shoulder against the column, and I saw in that impact a future where he was not my co-worker, but a name on a clipboard. Kerr saw it too. He shouted for a second set of hands. And the nurse from Station 5 stepped in without a pause, grabbing the pole midway and bracing. The two men held the loop together like a friend carries a heavy couch. The woman in scrubs made a small motion with her head toward me. I went to her side. She told me quietly that if the loop snapped, we would retreat through the channel in pairs, with one person watching the subject and one person watching the ground. She told me to grab the CO2 extinguisher by the cage in case we needed a blast of cold and noise to reset a moment. She did not tell me where to spray. She trusted me to use my judgment. That trust steadied my hands. At 11:21, the radio returned with one more sentence, raw and useful. The message said that the outbreak at the hospital had begun inside the sleep ward. It said the staff had been overtaken when comatose patients sat up. It said to avoid narrow hallways. It said to give the infected wide turns. It did not say infected. It did not use any word that would scare more than it helped. I appreciated that. We gave wide turns by redesign. I took the shrink wrap roll and expanded the channel's corners into curves. I rounded the path like a freeway engineer who had decided to be kind to trucks. The subjects noticed the curve and adopted it. The guard with 004 used the curve to steer him toward the sidewall. The man in the trailer watched me lay plastic like a spider and gave me a small salute with the water bottle. A sudden thought came and made my feet move before my head had finished it. I ran to the freezer door and checked the latch. I checked the hinge pins. I looked for a way to wedge it open that would still allow it to close if someone panicked and slammed it. I found a short pallet board and placed it against the jamb at a safe angle. I hung a piece of tape with a note written in Sharpie. Pull to free latch. Do not slam. It looked foolish and merciful at once. I turned to see Dole 12 standing at the entry to the channel, one hand low, brushing the plastic as if feeling wind through tall grass. The plastic twanged and recovered. Dr. Roth watched this with that same school teacher focus. A sharp, metallic clang ricocheted across the warehouse, too loud to pin on settling pipes or a loose rack brace. Every head turned. 012 jerked away from the plastic, pupils flaring like shutter apertures. Before Roth could issue another calm instruction, the straps that hemmed Station 5 trembled, then parted as if someone inside had finally solved the puzzle of tension and direction. Trial subject 019 stepped through the breach, eyes vacant yet predatory, lips peeled back from teeth, slick with IV fluid. The nurse who had been guiding him earlier stutter-stepped, trying to hurt her 019 back with voice alone. But the subject advanced, arms stiff, shoulders rolling in short, powerful shoeies that ignored personal space the way a forklift ignores cones. The plastic wall warped under 019's weight, the shrink wrap sheeting tearing with a dry howl, and the entire enclosure lost its straight lines in seconds. Kerr shouted for the CO2 extinguisher even as he grabbed the pull from the exhausted guard. Luis snatched a broom handle, half out of reflex, half out of some instinct older than reason. I triggered the extinguisher and sent a freezing fog across Woe 19's chest, not to hurt him, just to break momentum. It bought 3 heartbeats, nothing more. 019 recoiled, then ploughed forward again, his skin blanching, but his resolve unbroken. 3 other subjects drawn by the commotion pivoted toward the widening gap in the containment barrier. Their footsteps landed in eerie unison, a metronome of error we'd never rehearsed for. Dr. Roth called for everyone still ambulatory to fall back to the corridor, but half the staff hesitated, frozen by training manuals that had never accounted for medicine teaching a virus new tricks. The man who'd waited in the trailer tried to guide one of the data clerks toward the freezer hall. Mid-stride, the clerk's knees buckled, and he pitched forward, vomiting a ribbon of bloody mucus that steamed on contact with the concrete. His badge bounced once, then lay still. Lights dimmed as the generator outside coughed. The yard flood lamp winked out entirely, plunging the back half of the building into shadow, broken only by the forklift's rotating beco. Panic spread faster than any pathogen. People scattered, some for the freezer door I'd prepped, others for the dock that was already compromised by smoke-tainted air. Roth grabbed Kerr by the vest and shoved him toward the freezer, barking that leadership belonged where the survivors would be, not where the variables had won. Kerr didn't argue. He was too busy counting heads and subtracting losses he couldn't prevent. Overhead, thunderous footfalls pounded the sheet metal roof. The mezzanine glass, already spiderwebbed, finally surrendered. 2 figures, maintenance techs from the day crew, now grey-skinned and twitching, dropped onto the pallet stacks in a cascade of broken safety glass. One rolled off the shrink-wrap tower and landed hard, snapping a femur backwards with a wet crack. The injury slowed him, but did not stop him. He began dragging himself, hands clawing for the nearest living ankle. Luis jabbed downward with the broom handle, pinning the crawler's shoulder long enough for the nurse beside him to clear the path. The smell in the air shifted, a hot iron tang that meant blood volumes out of proportion to the cuts we could see. Another nurse, Marissa, the youngest, screamed when subject lunged, teeth closing on the fabric of her sleeve. She yanked free, but a fine spray of arterial red painted the front of her gown. Subject 021 swallowed, blinked, and tightened his grip with surprising precision, pulling her backward into the tangle of ruptured plastic. She didn't disappear from sight. The plastic wrapped her like cellophane around cut flowers, her outline thrashing until it sank to the floor. I reached the freezer door ahead of Kerr and Louise, slamming the pallet board aside and holding the latch while 6 staffers and the trailer man rushed inside. Cold air billowed out, frosting the edges of my gloves. Roth waved for 2 more, but the guard with the restraint pole was still wrestling subject 004, whose fixation on the forklift mast had mutated into something harder, more deliberate. The subject bent the looped pole bar, toward the guard's face. Cartilage popped where fingers met steel. Kerr sprinted back, tackled the guard clear, then yelled for me to close the freezer. I hesitated, counting silhouettes still outside. Yet the sound of gunshots, security sidearm, desperate and late, made the decision for me. I pulled the door until the latch clicked, then wedged the board across the jamb from the inside. 15 of us huddled among pallet racks of antiviral vials, breath clouding in front of flashlights salvaged from the dock. Someone sobbed into gloved hands. Someone else recited quiet prayers that misted mid-sentence. The overhead lamp flickered, starved for generator voltage. Kerr ordered silence and ran quick head counts, voice edged with the brittle calm of a man who knew numbers could still shrink. Roth crouched near a vent grill, listening for changes in the room tone, a sudden hush too complete or a new scrape that announced uninvited entry. Every so often, a muffled impact rattled the freezer wall as though the building itself were exhaling wrong. Luis peeled off his hoodie and wrapped it around the guard's broken hand, cinching a length of tape as a makeshift splint. The guard winced but kept watch on the door, pistol wobbling in his good hand. The man, whose wife was quarantined at home, slid down a stack of coolant packs and stared at nothing, lips counting seconds in a private ledger. The trailer's diesel hum outside faltered again, sank, then caught. Each stutter hammering home how thin our margin had become. Through the thin gasket seal I heard a chorus growing, not screams, not howls, something closer to a crowd chanting out of sync. Syllables mashed into low, guttural surges. Roth put his ear to the metal just long enough to blanch. He whispered that the subjects had begun echoing each other, maybe passing information the way flocks trade direction mid-flight. Kerr asked what that meant for us. Roth answered with a question of his own. How fast could we evacuate through the roof hatch above the freezer if the main room failed entirely? No one had measured the ladder or tested the bolts. A dull boom shook frost from the ceiling struts. The forklift battery must have detonated under stress. Or maybe a stray round found its core. The light bars finally surrendered, plunging the freezer into near darkness, broken only by a single emergency LED over the egress panel. Its glow too weak to show faces, strong enough to cast nervous shadows in every corner. I felt the hum of the compressor fade to silence. Warm air from the warehouse leaked through micro gaps, tainted with the coppery perfume of mass panic. Someone asked who still had phone signal. Screens lit, search bars spun. Every carrier logo sat mute. Disconnection felt physical, like a rung missing on a ladder you reach for in the dark. Outside, the chanting became pounding. Hands, bodies, maybe furniture used as a ram. Metal deformed in slow waves, the hinge bolts telegraphed each strike down the inside skin of the freezer, a crude Morse warning we couldn't decrypt fast enough. Roth closed his eyes as if replaying earlier footage, looking for missed frames that held answers. None surfaced. Kerr motioned me and Lewis to the hatch. I climbed first, fingertips burning from cold bite against the steel ladder. At the top, the locking wheel turned half a notch before jamming. Ice and paint fused it to the frame. Below the guard steadied the ladder, his breath a soar of pain. Another impact bowed the freezer door inward, gasket whining. From the other side I heard Marissa's voice, soft, pleading, threaded with a rasp that no longer sounded fully human. Someone behind her repeated the short, long rhythm with fists, striking metal until skin split. Kerr hissed for a crowbar. Louise passed up the broken broom handle. I wedged it into the wheel spokes and leaned, praying the weld would fail before the shaft. A sudden crack echoed, either victory or disaster. The wheel spun free an inch, letting snow-cold air rush from above. I couldn't see past the hatch lip, only taste open sky and rain on the night breeze. Lights far off flickered like a city failing by districts. Roth gave the order. 2 at a time, ladder up out, scattered to the northern berm, where the rail spur dipped below grade. From there, follow the track west until dawn. He believed the infected resisted slopes and uneven ballast. The rails might confuse their edge-finding fixation. The plan fit his string through not theory, but it also required leaving some behind to delay the breach and buy seconds. No one volunteered. No one refused. The choice dissolved as another battering ram thudded the freezer door off one hinge, stainless, clanging to the floor. Kerr raised the pistol, jaw set in grim calculus. I looked down the ladder and met his eyes for what might be the last uncomplicated moment we would share. Then I heaved the hatch fully open. A strip of storm-lit sky sliced across the freezer ceiling, blue-grey and indifferent. Louise climbed past me, boots clanging, hauling the guard one-handed despite the splint. The man with the wife paused at the rung, whispered something I couldn't pass, and pressed a thumb drive into my palm. Data pools, raw logs, every failed reading that had led us here. "Someone needs to tell it right," he said, voice a brittle whisper. Then he started up, shoulders shaking under invisible weight. Below, Roth pulled the pallet board from the jamb and wedged it sideways into the gap where the hinge had failed. He shouted for Kerr to follow us, but Kerr shook his head, fired 2 rounds into the advancing silhouettes, and shoved Roth toward the ladder. The freezer echoed with the clash of metal on bone, a roar of compressed air venting, and the first unmistakable screams of people who realized help had to be reinvented on the fly. Roth climbed, dragging the box of vials over his shoulder like contraband from a doomed era. I emerged onto the roof just as wind picked up, whipping steam plumes off the HVAC stacks. Lewis herded the first wave toward the far parapet, where a maintenance ladder led to the rail spur. Lightning flashed deep over downtown, outlining skyscrapers already half dark. Sirens faded in and out as though swallowed by the city's concrete canyons. Behind me, Roth's head cleared the hatch. He braced the lid open with a broken ladder rung. Inside, the freezer erupted in violent clangs. Then, dull, wet impacts I refused to catalogue. Kerr hadn't climbed after all. Roth whispered that we had seconds before the infected found the maintenance stair, and that the rail spur was only a theory. I tucked the thumb drive into an inner pocket and scanned the skyline, hunting for anything that looked like a switchyard dip or a service tunnel. The storm clouds flickered again, showing more shapes on distant rooftops. Some trying to signal, some simply wandering the edges, mesmerized by height and the geometry of ledges. Survival and pattern recognition had become the same task. We spread out along the parapet, cold wind biting through gowns and scrubs, waiting for momentum or terror to decide which direction we would run first. Below, the freezer door finally buckled with a scream of tortured steel, and a surge of indistinct figures poured into the yard, some slipping, some scrambling upright, all angling for lines, corners, edges they could understand. The sky opened with a scatty ear of cold rain that smelled of burnt plastic and diesel. There was no clear path, only options measured in minutes. I looked at Luis, then at Roth. Nobody spoke because every word felt like it might knock the world further out of alignment. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. Hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams.